The NBA Draft, the day where 60 college or international players get chosen by a team for the chance of becoming an NBA player and start their career in the best basketball league in the world. Over the years, the discussion of draft classes have always been a fun topic of debate on how one turned out and how one is better or worse than the other. And with my latest rendition of this video hitting 1K likes that I had last time, I think it's time to go over the 2000s decade of draft classes and rate them on a tier list to see how they stand the test of time after an entire decade and some change of service, and see what is the very best draft class of the 2000s decade. And just like the last time, we will consider everything in the likes of achievements as a class together, the longevity of the class itself, category leads, the absolute works. And be sure to check out my 2010s decade video after this one. Before we start, if you want to see more videos like these, be sure to like the video to show support and subscribe to be notified when new videos come out. But as usual, this will be a long one, but you already know who it is. Wally!
3, 2, 1.
Weights in the weight room, so he stitched up in the left.
But before we start this video, I am happy to announce that this video is sponsored by the one, the only, Raid Shadow Legends, one of the best fantasy action mobile RPGs out there, with over 700 champions for you to collect and counting, in an expansive PvE and PvP content, all in the clutches of your fingertips on your phone or even on mobile. But if you're looking for a challenge within the game immediately, let me introduce you to one of Raid's best and most infamous end-game bosses, the Hydra Clan boss. And the Hydra Clan boss will be faced off against 6 powerful heads of a Hydra, each with their own powerful abilities to keep you at the ends of your wits and give you the biggest challenge Raid has to offer. Whether that's the head of Blight that will slowly take you out with poison debuffs, the head of Torment that's all about paralyzing your units, keeping you at bay, the head of Mischief who is constantly stealing your hard-earned buffs, the head of Decay that is all about making your healing useless and has the ability to heal other heads, the head of Wrath that can one-shot your entire team if you're not careful and come prepared, and lastly, the head of Suffering that has the ability Pain Link that'll cause you to receive any damage caused to it, the most annoying of them all. But in Raid's newest update, you can now face off against the Hydra or facing off in their clan v clan competition, as you and other clans can compete to see who can cause the most damage to the Hydra for top tier rewards you can use towards your progression. With all of this and more coming to Raid, if you haven't started playing yet, what are you waiting for? Use my link in the description or scan my QR code to get insane bonuses. We are talking about a free epic champion Knight Errant and other useful rewards to give you a boost over newcomers. Again, thank you to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video, and let's get back into it. Before the 2000s even started, we just came out of the 1999 draft that had stars everywhere and would end up creating even more prospects as the years go by, creating 9 all-stars and a myriad of great role players that ended the 90s on a good note. But starting off in the 2000s, we had a giant disappointment, and it is also known as one of the worst draft classes of all time. So bad that the #1 overall pick is headlined by Kenyon Martin, who by no means is a slouch in the NBA, being a main factor of those New Jersey Nets teams who made it to the finals in his second and third seasons. But as a #1 overall pick, he didn't achieve much outside of that screams historic, and won't even be in the Hall of Fame most likely. Being only a one-time All-Star, mainly being a beneficiary of good point guards throughout his career in Jason Kidd, Andre Miller, and Allen Iverson, and doesn't have much stats-wise that will pop out at you, and that models the #1 overall pick of the average NBA draft. He led a very long and lucrative career in the NBA, but as a #1 overall pick, he is highly underwhelming and only headlines one of the worst draft classes of all time. But to continue down the rabbit hole of this class, the class also created 2 more All-Stars in the entirety of the class, and Jamal McGlure, who became the second ever Canadian All-Star ever, and has only received that honor once while leading a very okay career derailed by injuries. And finally, the person who people say is the best player from this class and the only person making an All-NBA team in this class, Michael Redd. As we all know, Michael Redd was more of a surprise to people, being the 43rd pick of that draft class and barely even got a chance in his rookie season. But as he slowly got more time on the Bucks and veterans left, he became an all-star in his 4th season and reaching all NBA third team status in that same year. And despite him averaging 20 points per game in 4 more seasons on the Bucks, he was never given another all-star or an all-NBA nod. If I had to guess, it was due to his lack of popularity and lack of team success. But when it comes down to all-stars, that's all you're going to get from this class. 3 of them. You still have some standouts in this class, like one of the best 6 men of all time, Jamal Crawford, who won 3 of them, Mike Miller, who was also a 6 Man of the Year winner and a 2-time champion with the Miami Heat, and the 2008 most improved player, Hedo Turkoglu, who came to prominence in the NBA scene from his time in Orlando. But again, outside of those 6 players I spoke of, the standouts in this class is rather minimal. And due to that, as the easiest class I have to talk about today as a ranking, it will easily be placed in the F tier. Worst of the worst. It was certainly interesting to see how much college international talent can come together and create such a weak draft class in 1 year, but every class has their bright spots. But compared to the next 9 we will speak of, it is definitely the most dull out of all of them. After the disappointment that was the 2000s draft class, the phrase, "it can't get any worse than this," becomes true, because the #1 overall pick in the 2001 draft class was even more disappointing than the 2000s draft class. One of the last high school first overall picks ever in Kwame Brown. Now, everything that has ever been said about Kwame Brown has already been spoken about in many other videos, and I myself don't have much to add to the context of this video. But when it comes down to this class, everyone remembers it for the flop that was Michael Jordan's first time around as a big wig in the Washington Wizards organization. But after that point, the class absolutely redeems itself. Let's first off start with its all-stars, which this class created 8 of them, the fastest of them being the second lowest drafted out of all of them, Gilbert Arenas. Gilbert Arenas said himself on record that his own attitude was the reason that he became a second-round pick. But one thing you can't take away from him was his grind set and his skill set. Now, he got quickly canned and not brought back to his original drafted team in Golden State. But when he went to Washington, who was in desperate need of a point guard, he came in and turned them into a perennial playoff team, earning his first ever All-Star appearance in his 4th season in the NBA, 2 seasons removed from winning Most Improved Player. And as we all know, he going on a rampage throughout the league with a 3-year streak of All-Star appearances and All-NBA bouts. Unfortunately, his time in the NBA would come to a steep decline, coming in the case of his gun incident and receiving the amnesty clause due to his injuries later in his career that would get him shipped out of Washington and ended his career pretty swiftly. But people don't give him the props as the best player in this class. That rankings go to the Spanish product, Pau Gasol, the 3rd pick in the NBA draft, who garnered 6 All-Star appearances, 4 All-NBA honors, and most importantly, winning 2 championships with Kobe Bryant, making him a Laker legend. Some people argue that his status, they could also go to Tony Parker, the 28th pick of this class, who had very similar production achievements to Pau Gasol, but of course, he himself owns 5 rings to his 2. But enough of that debate. You still got 5 more All-Stars in this pretty hefty class. Gerald Wallace, who earned his 1 and only All-Star appearance at 27, the 2nd pick in Tyson Chandler, who was an All-NBA selector and DPOY winner in the same season, and got his first ever All-Star appearance at 30, Joe Johnson, the 48th leading scorer of all time, and a 7-time All-Star, Zach Randolph became a Memphis legend and a 2-time All-Star and All-NBA member, and lastly, Mehmet Okur, a 1-time All-Star. He was a replacement All-Star, but who cares? Anyways, this class was stacked with talent, and it doesn't even end there. You still got one of the most electrified players of the decade in Jason Richardson at 5, one of the best role players of all time is Shane Battier, and a 2-time All-Defensive member, Richard Jefferson, and of course, the best of the best, Brian Scalabrine. Overall, you got a class that had some of the most All-Star selections you'll see in this video, top tier scorers and role players, and home of one of the best NBA memes of all time. But in the context of this video and this ranking, I will easily put this class in a comfortable A-tier selection. Some of you might be surprised that it's not an S, but when I tell you this decade even had classes that can easily put a tier above despite all the depth and all-star level talent it contains, and again, you will certainly see why soon. Now we move on to the 2002 NBA draft class. As we all know, it was headlined with the first and only Chinese-born NBA player getting the #1 overall pick and one of the tallest NBA players of all time, Yao Ming. Yao Ming is, of course, as we all know, was a product of 2 of the tallest people in China at the time getting together to create Yao. And even he didn't even like basketball all that much growing up. But again, he was quite literally made for the sport. Even though his career was very short-lived, only playing 8 NBA seasons in the NBA, Yao Ming lived a very interesting NBA career with him making 8 All-Star teams in those 8 years, even with one where he only played 5 games in that season, earned 5 All-NBA entries, being one of the only players to ever beat Shaq in his prime, and of course, being a Hall of Famer. If his career was longer due to better health, he definitely helped this draft class ranking overall, but he himself as a first overall pick is definitely a very intriguing one and one we probably won't ever see again. But again, outside of him, you only have 3 other all-stars to even speak of, and out of the 3, only one of them expected to make something happen off the rip in the NBA, and that was Amari Stoudemire, who came into the NBA into an amazing situation with point guards and Stephon Marbury being a top-tier playmaker, creating a lot of shots for him at the rim and a lot of alley-oop dunks. And then of course Steve Nash later coming into his career, helping him earn 6 all-star appearances and 5 all-NBA honors, being a major developer of the small ball system and one of the most exciting players of the 2000s. For the last 2, you have Caron Butler, a 2-time all-star and a 1-time champion with the Dallas Mavericks, and Carlos Boozer, a second-round pick who was one of the surprises of the draft and skipped town to Utah after his time in Cleveland, where he became known as one of the best power forwards while he was in the league, which turned into 2 all-star appearances and a all-NBA bout in 2008. And just like the 2000 class, you have a case of a class that didn't really create a lot of depth outside of the all-stars and top players. You do have players like Tayshaun Prince, one of the best lockdowns of his time, and some nice front court depth in Luis Scola and Nene Hilario. But outside of Yao and Amari Stoudemire, this class isn't remembered for much, but you know what? I can't do this in the terms of ranking. I will put them in the D tier, 1 tier over the 2000s class. This class may not have much to speak about, but it does contain one of the best big men of his time and a perennial great big man who you can argue is better than the first overall pick that was the face of the class. So it's not as good in the great scheme of things, but it's no way as bad as 2000s. Gotta at least give it a little bit of respect. And now we get into the class that made an entire generation of basketball fans. The 2003 NBA draft class that was headlined by a pretty revolutionary trio of basketball players with their own stories and upsides in the NBA. So let's go in order of the draft selections. With the first overall pick, we have the one and only LeBron James. Coming into the NBA, he was known as the chosen one, and for good reason. Not being able to be stopped at the high school level, having nationally televised games everywhere he went, and being a celebrity at only 18 with all the upside in the world. He could literally be whatever he wanted in the league as long as he progressed, but his main draw that everybody loved about him was his S-tier athleticism and nice feel for the game despite being a high schooler. But what isn't there to say about his career? Being an all-star every year after his rookie year, the same with his all-NBA appearances, a 4-time champion, 4-time MVP, and as of recently, our all-time leading scorer, a record that possibly no one will be ever able to reach, especially as he continues to play in near top form, going into his 21st season, about to become 39 years old, and continuing his legacy as one of the NBA's greatest. The next player drafted out of this big 3 is Carmelo Anthony, who at Oak Hill Academy was a top-tier prospect and showed that to be even more of the truth, going to Syracuse and winning a national championship in his freshman season, something absolutely unheard of. With that, he used that season to go 3rd overall to the Denver Nuggets and leading his team to the playoffs in his rookie year, and as we all know, becoming one of the best 1v1 scorers in NBA history, a 10-time All-Star, and a 6-time All-NBA member. And lastly, with the 5th pick, Dwayne Wade, the electrifying player out of Marquette with speed compared to none, he was able to lead the Miami Heat to one of the best valuable rings of all time in the 06 finals and continuing his legacy as a champion with LeBron and 03 product Chris Bosh, while also adding 13 All-Star appearances and 8 All-NBA appearances. These 3 each fought years on top of years as some of the best players in the NBA and our generation, and their impact to a lot of peoples as fans and players has done a lot for the NBA. But even with that legacy, this class is still filled to the brim with talent, with 6 separate All-Stars. Chris Bosh, who we talked about earlier, who was one of the most versatile bigs in the NBA and also joined LeBron in his Miami campaign with 11 All-Star appearances. Chris came in the 6th pick to enter an All-Star selection in LA. Josh Howard, the 30th pick, earning an appearance in 2007 with the Mavericks. One of the best power forwards in the 2000s in David West, who became a great duo with Chris Paul in New Orleans with 2 All-Star appearances, and of course, winning 2 championships with the Golden State Warriors in his later years. And lastly, they even had 2 All All-Stars in the second round, with Kyle Korver, one of the best shooters of our time, and Mo Williams, one of LeBron James' best teammates in his first go-around in Cleveland. So while we talk about the 2003 class for their top three, we gotta realize just how deep this class goes with talent, and many GMs being able to make the absolute most of this class. Even outside of All-Stars, you still have other players who make this class even greater, whether it be Sixth Man of the Year Leandro Barbosa or the 2005 Most Improved Player Boris Diaw. Even with the big three I talked about, this class runs deeper than any that we talked about so far today, and that easily places them in the S tier. A GOAT candidate, multiple generational players, and a ton of All-Stars, creating a mix, one of the best classes of all time. And that's pretty damn hard to compete with. And after what some people will call one of the best classes we will ever see, with 3 predicted guaranteed Hall of Famers, bare minimum, we move on to the 2004 NBA draft class, where for the 3rd straight year it is highlighted by another high school product at the #1 overall spot. And he himself would be regarded as one of the best players of our era, and his name is Dwight Howard, who was drafted by the Orlando Magic. I spoke about his career in excruciating detail in a past video that you should look up, but as we all know, he would turn into one of the most dominant forces in the NBA. As Shaq was getting older and less dominant, the NBA now had Dwight Howard taking his place, being an 8-time All-Star, 8-time All-NBA member, 3 straight Defensive Player of the Year winner, 5-time All-Defensive member, and made it to the finals once in his prime with the Orlando Magic. While his career thought to take a better turn in his prime, we still should remember Dwight for his prime and dominance on the court. But does the rest of the class get even anywhere near what Dwight was able to do for himself in the subject of this video? The answer is kinda sorta. The class is starring 4 other All-Stars, but as perennial threats, they usually fell off as soon as they hit that status of an All-Star, which doesn't entirely help the case for their class. First, we have Andre Iguodala, who is a 1-time All-Star, and not the most impressive stats-wise when you look at his year-to-year status, but still is known as one of the best defensive swingmen of our time, and of course led a very successful career in his 30s as a key contributor of the Golden State dynasty in more ways than one. Jameer Nelson, a teammate of Dwight Howard, who is known as one of the best scorers at his position, who only garnered 1 All-Star nod. Devin Harris, who peaked with his 1 All-Star nod and immediately saw a decrease in production in his career. And finally, Luol Deng, one of the more consistent products here on the Chicago Bulls team, with 2 All-Star appearances. But as soon as he was dealt away from Chicago, he went into obscurity, and of course being a main beneficiary of that 2016 offseason. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make is this class is kind of average in retrospect. You still have some very good non-All-Stars littered across the class, like Big Al Jefferson, who had some of the best footwork as a center that I've ever seen, a 2005 Sixth Man of the Year in Ben Gordon, who was able to do that in his rookie season, by the way. Josh Smith, one of the most electrifying power forwards in the NBA. J.R. Smith, I don't even need to talk about him, it's J.R. Smith. Tony Allen, Mr. First Team, all defense. Kevin Martin, one of the more underrated scorers in the NBA during his time in the league. The list goes pretty deep, but due to the lack of real top-tier talent outside of Dwight Howard, you can see how this class looks rather ordinary, with the main player who was supposed to be great, and then a tier down creates a few more All-Stars, and of course, the non-All-Star standouts. With that, I will give the 2004 class a C-tier ranking. You can see by the amount of standout All-Stars or not, it's better than 2002, but you'll understand later in this video, there are many classes that end up having a very similar fate as this one. And now on to the 2005 NBA draft class. We all remember this class had a lot of hype off the rip because of the point guard duo coming in from college, and Chris Paul from Wake Forest and Darren Williams from Illinois. Both of these point guards had their own skill sets that screamed All-Stars at the next level, and even though both of them didn't go #1 overall, they both went back-to-back from each other and started an NBA-wide argument for a time debating who was better and fought over the #1 point guard in the NBA status. However, we all know who won the all-time battle at the end of the day: the point guard, Chris Paul. Chris Paul, now in 19 seasons, in his time has proven time and time again for his claim as one of the best point guards ever, even if he is without some NBA jewelry. 12-time NBA All-Star, 11-time All-NBA member, 5 or more seasons as a steal champion and an assist champion in an NBA season, and with a little cherry on top, a 9-time All-Defensive member. And most impressively, he's 3rd all-time in both steals and assists. CP3's legacy will be ever remembered due to his consistency as a point guard and his production. However, again, the only thing keeping him back from all-time discussions is the lack of NBA hardware as an NBA champion. But as the undisputed best player in this class, how do other people bring this class into more notoriety? Well, again, you do have Darren Williams, his so-called rival in his prime, who brings along 3 All-Star appearances and a few All-NBA appearances. But unfortunately, his fall off in the NBA sphere was pretty steep during his time with the Brooklyn and New Jersey Nets. But for a time, there was a real argument between him and CP3 in the 2000s. But after all that All-Star talent, there still falls another 3. Danny Granger was one of the most underrated players from the class who grew into an all-star in the 08-09 season while also winning Most Improved Player that same year. However, after a few more seasons of production, fell to the injury bug, which made his prime super duper short. Then you have David Lee, who was a 2-time All-Star, albeit 3 seasons apart from each other, and even made the All-NBA team in 2013 with 18 points, 11 rebounds, and 3 assists a game. But again, he himself fell to injury, and then he got soon replaced by Draymond Green due to it. And lastly, Andrew Bynum, who is again another example of a player who fell immediately after his All-Star bout that earned him an All-NBA honor in 2012, where he averaged a monster double-double with 19 points, 11 rebounds, and nearly 2 blocks a game. But due to a knee injury, it prematurely ended his career, only playing 8 seasons in the NBA. After that, you see a few more standouts in the league. Andrew Bogut, the first overall pick of the class, who, for lack of a better sentence, led a very interesting career. Never making an All-Star team, yet earning an All-NBA bid in 2010, only earning 1 All-Defensive bid in 2015 at 30 years old, despite having better seasons defensively in his youth, and finally earning his 1 and only ring with Golden State. Next, you have Lou Will, again, one of the best 6-man of all time, winning 3 of them. And lastly, the 2006 MIP Monte Ellis, who led a very high-scoring career in the league with no success behind it. But outside of the people I just talked about, you don't see very many impactful names here. You still see some names are recognized from highlights, whether that be Gerald Green or Nate Robinson, but in the grand scheme of things, they do nothing to boost this class, unless you really like slam dunk contests. Anyways, on the tier list, it will end up in the same ranking as the last class, C tier. Kind of average, maybe even above average if you consider the 1 All-NBA selection a few of these players have, but considering some of the classes we'll talk about soon, you can see how this class can be a C tier ranking, even with one of the best point guards to ever do it. In the 2006 NBA draft, the consensus #1 pick was not obvious as the draft was happening, but if there is one way to describe this draft class, it is underappreciated, owning a lot of players that you could argue was underappreciated or underrated in their NBA careers. However, the #1 pick of this class was a surprise to many, being Andrea Bargnani, the 7-foot stretch big from Italy. His career wasn't anything spectacular by any means, mainly just being an above-average player in the league, even once averaging 21 points per game in his 5th season in Toronto. However, his career fell off soon after. But after that, this class has a good amount of all-stars. Firstly, let's talk about a player who is most underappreciated in this class, in my opinion, the 2nd pick of the 2006 draft, LaMarcus Aldridge. The Bulls made a big mistake trading him away on draft night, as LaMarcus Aldridge returned into one of the best inside-out power forwards of the 2000s that we've ever seen. As soon as his 2nd season, you can see the groundwork that he become one of the top power forwards of the league, and in his time in the NBA, he became a 7-time All-Star, a 5-time All-NBA member, and leading the NBA in 2-point field goal attempts, and many on top of many NBA seasons. His under-the-radar career is mainly due to his lack of playoff success in Portland, and the same when he went to San Antonio post their ring in 2014. He will always be known as one of the best mid-range shooting big men of all time, with a super automatic jumper. As you go down the draft board, you also meet another NBA legend, but this time one whose career was cut way too short, and Brandon Roy, the 6th pick, who was also traded to Portland on draft night. However, for Brandon, he became an all-star as soon as his 2nd season, and an all-NBA product in his 3rd with his amazing shot creation skills and athleticism. But due to a very brutal injury, his career quite literally ended prematurely, only after seeing 4 seasons of his prime, which sucks considering how great he could have been long-term if healthy. But we still have 2 more guards who made great long-term impacts. First, we have one of the best playmakers of the 2000s in Rajon Rondo at the 21st spot, who enjoyed a long career in the NBA, mainly known for his time in the Boston Celtics, being a 2-time assist leader with 11 per game, a 1-time champion, and a 4-time All-Star with 4 all-defensive teams. But even after his time in Boston, he still proved to be a top point guard talent, leading the league in assists with the Kings in 2016 and winning a second ring with the Lakers in 2020. Overall, he's one of the best playmakers of all time and currently is 14th all time in the NBA in assists. But the next point guard to talk about enjoyed much more success later in his career, and Kyle Lowry, the 24th pick, who even though didn't have the best career starting off, after a few changes of scenery, finally found his place in the league in Toronto, where he became a 6-time All-Star, a 1-time All-NBA member, and of course, a 1-time champion in 2019. And again, at the end of the day, he became a very underrated top-tier point guard, currently being 24th all-time in assists, and brought Toronto basketball back to prominence after the Vince Carter days. And for the last All-Star, another underappreciated player, and Paul Millsap, the 47th pick, do-it-all power forward with one of the most versatile skill sets that fit the modern-day game perfectly. Mainly getting his flowers later in his career, averaging 17 points, 8 rebounds, and 3 assists, and a steal in the block in his 4-year stretch as a All-Star. As you go down the class, so players don't really become all that noticeable, with the only other notable players being Rudy Gay and JJ Redick. So just like the last class, due to the lack of depth outside of its All-Stars, I gotta give it a C-tier ranking. I hate to call it average due to the fact that I called a lot of these players underappreciated, but due to my research for this video, this class ends up becoming so for the level of talent it produced, some of the guys that fell off way too quickly, and the lack of real long-term depth that makes any real impact in the league's history. The 2007 NBA draft was highlighted by two main players. The heavy-footed 7-foot center Greg Oden, who is believed to be the next big center in the NBA, and Kevin Durant, the damn near 7-foot prospect with a game never believed to ever be seen before for someone his size. The debate between these two would top headlines the entire pre-draft process, but due to Greg Oden's bigger chance of being the better product, considering we've never seen anything like KD work out before, he went first. Of course, we know how the story goes for Greg Oden, so we won't speak about it here, but we got to talk about the second pick, Kevin Durant. KD coming in was an absolute monster scoring wise and showed in college with some time he could be a top scorer on the level of Tracy McGrady. And all it took was one season to show that Portland made a mistake not taking him, getting 20 points per game in his rookie season and leading the NBA in scoring only in his 3rd season with 30 a game. The NBA was seeing something damn near never seen ever before, and it came in a near 7-foot lanky frame, and his name was Kevin Durant. And it's now 16 years going into 17-year career. He now owns 13 All-Star appearances, a 10-time All-NBA member, a 1-time MVP, a 4-time scoring champion, and of course, a 2-time NBA champion. By the end of his time in the NBA, he'll be known as one of the best players of all time, skill-wise and accolade-wise, and even if his public perception isn't the best for a few reasons, you can't take away just how good this man was at putting a brown basketball in a circular hoop. But as we all know, the catalog of players this class produced only makes this class even stronger. With the pick right behind him, you have Al Horford, who got himself a lot of NBA love early in his career, becoming an all-star as soon as his 3rd season in the NBA, being a super versatile center capable of making jump shots, working in the paint, playmaking, and being a top-tier defensive center, getting an all-defensive appearance, an all-NBA appearance, and finally, 5 all-star appearances. Even right behind him for the 4th pick, you have Mike Conley, who at 4 was consistently a very underrated point guard in the NBA, who finally got his first All-Star nod at 33 years old and consistently one of the best defensive forces at the point guard position. But as you go down the class, you still got some standouts All-Star wise. In the 9th pick in the draft, you got Joakim Noah, who will be forever loved by Bulls fans for his defensive ferocity and also being a top playmaker at the center position. He also got some MVP considerations in 2014, where he was 4th place in voting, averaging 12, 11, and 5 with a steal and a block. The stats may not stand out, but his impact was absolutely irreplaceable. Overall, he enjoyed his time in Chicago with 2 All-Star appearances, 3 all-defensive nods, and being the DPOY in 2014. And finally, one of the best international players of the 2010s, Marc Gasol, who was a 2nd-round pick and of course infamously traded for his brother Pau Gasol on draft night. But now being the new Gasol brother in Memphis, he had a lot of shoes to fill, and he did exactly that, leading the grit and grind era with 3 All-Star appearances, 2 All-NBA nods, and being the 2013 DPOY, and being, again, the starting center on the 2019 Raptors team, winning his one and only championship. But all these all-stars were either fighting for a top 5 spot in their position at one point, and all leading very long careers where their impact was felt wherever they went. But the 2007 class still has a lot of impact outside of all-stars, like the 2010 MIP, Aaron Brooks, and other assortment of top-tier role players, whether it be Marco Bellinelli on the 2014 Spurs championship team, Jeff Green this last season with the Nuggets, the absolute works. For that, on the tier list, I can easily give them the edge on the C tier classes and put them in the B tier. I wouldn't say they're as good as the 2001 class, who owned more all-stars and all-NBA talent, but I do believe this class was definitely above average in quality compared to the 10 we talk about today. Going into the 2008 class, everyone already knew who the undisputed #1 pick was going to be. No question. It was going to be the uber-athletic point guard from Memphis, Derrick Rose. But did anyone expect him to lead a Bulls team the way that he did off the rip? No way. Derrick Rose's prime and reign was so dominant that even in his 3rd season, he was able to take away the MVP from 2-time straight winner LeBron James, averaging 25 points, 7 assists, and 4 rebounds a game while leading the Bulls to the best record in the East. As we know, however, he would end up burning out in the league as a player in his form after his devastating injury in the playoffs against the 76ers that will slowly derail his career. But even if he couldn't continue his prime with his athleticism, someone in his class with similar athleticism would do it for him. And obviously that is Russell Westbrook, the #4 pick. He himself was able to assimilate himself into the NBA game very easily with his athleticism and turn himself into one of the best point guards we have ever seen. And his list of accomplishments go deep. 9-time All-Star, 9-time All-NBA, a 3-time assist leader in the NBA, and a 2-time scoring champ. And of course, most impressively for his all-time resume, the leader of triple-doubles all-time, having 4 seasons averaging a triple-double, and of course, the cherry on top, a 1-time MVP. He's even currently 9th all-time in assists in an NBA career. Again, as much scrutiny and criticism Russ gets over his entire career, especially recently, Russell Westbrook will always be known as one of the best point guards ever and one of the best playmakers ever, and at his prime, absolutely unguardable at his position. In total though, this class created 7 all-stars, and all of them were for a good reason. Kevin Love was consistently one of the best power forwards in the NBA and became mostly known for his strong rebounding presence in Minnesota and his 1 championship in Cleveland, while also having 2 All-NBA appearances. Brook Lopez was known as one of the best centers in the Eastern Conference in his prime with the Nets, only getting 1 All-Star appearance and 2 All-Defensive appearances with his time with the Bucks, and went through a career resurgence as a top paint defender and a great 3-ball shooting big man. He even almost won a DPOY this season at the age of 34. Roy Hibbert was a top-tier defensive presence in the paint with his time in Indiana, and it turned into 2 All-Star appearances. And DeAndre Jordan, the 2nd-round pick, who even turned out better than him with his overwhelming paint presence, being a top rebounder in the NBA, winning it twice, a 3-time All-NBA member, and infamously being a first-teamer in 2016, a 2-time All-Defensive member, and a 1-time All-Star. Kind of weird how he's a 3-time All-NBA member, but a 1-time All-Star, but we don't talk about that. But the last out of the All-Stars of the 7 is the oldest of the bunch to get to that point, and that's Goran Dragic. Goran Dragic, at the age of 27, finally broke out for the Suns post-Steve Nash, averaging 20 points and 6 assists, shooting over 50% from the field and 40% from 3. But after getting traded to the Miami Heat, he was finally able to get the All-Star appearance he was looking for in the NBA at the age of 31. But in that season I spoke up with the Suns, he was also the MIP winner that year and an All-NBA member despite not being an All-Star. The NBA is weird and inconsistent with their logic, as you can see from this video. Anyways, with our 7 All-Stars, it makes one of the stronger classes we've talked about, but further making it better in retrospect is the fact that created the careers of 6th Man of the Year Eric Gordon, 2-time block leader and 3-time All-Defensive member Serge Ibaka, and the 2012 Most Improved Player Ryan Anderson, despite him not doing much after that. Even outside of that, you can still scroll down the list and see many names that have done much in the league, but was still impactful in their own way. And with a super stat class like this, you know the obvious choice for this class in this tier list, S tier. Top of the pack alongside 2003, creating 2 MVPs and many All-NBA members is already tongue enough, but creating a myriad of top role players that bring this class over the top to make it quite incomparable. But we still have one more class that has quite the story itself. They usually say that you leave the best for last in these type of scenarios, but I think that holds true when it comes to the 2009 draft class. Right off the bat, you already have an all-time great prospect eager to make his way to the NBA as the unanimous #1 overall pick, Blake Griffin from Oklahoma. Just like other physical freaks of nature we talked about earlier in this video who was able to easily transition to the NBA, people can tell that he had all-time potential if he simply progressed in the right way. And with his debut a year later after unfortunately experiencing an injury in a preseason game, Blake Griffin immediately went on his tear of dunking and overpowering anyone in his way and being one of the most versatile bigs in the NBA, being able to create his own shot, shooting the occasional three-year midi, and even using his athleticism for defense. Even after his split from the Clippers, he showed that he can do a lot more with his game if he had the ball more of his hands in Detroit, doing a lot more as a player before flaming out in his later years. But in his long and 13-year career so far, he garnered 6 All-Star appearances and even became one as a rookie and was a 5-time All-NBA product and a perennial MVP candidate when he was a Clipper. Usually you think that's as good as he's going to get when it comes to a #1 overall pick becoming an All-Star since day one, but 2 people actually end up overshadowing Blake years later in their primes. The first one being James Harden, the 3rd pick who had All-Star potential noticed by the NBA player base, but was potentially held back due to his role in OKC. But once he went to Houston, he started his long career of dominance with a long streak of 10 All-Star appearances, being a 7-time All-NBA member, a 2-time assist leader, and a 3-time scoring champ while scoring 36 points a game. That gives him the 7th largest point per game average in NBA history, only behind players like Wilt and of course Michael Jordan. And of course the cherry on top, his one and only league MVP. But later in the draft we have a player who is currently in the talks, one of the history's best, Davidson's own Stephen Curry. The start of his career had some ups and downs when it came to his health and role on the Warriors, fighting with a then Monte Ellis at one point. But once all that got cleared up, he started his legacy for potentially the best point guard in NBA history, and of course, undisputably, the best shooter of all time, breaking Ray Allen's 3-point record. But his career is much more than that. His dominance as a player has created much more, like becoming the first and only unanimous MVP in NBA history, a 4-time champion, 9-time All-NBA, and 9-time All-Star. And to add a little bit more to that, he was also a 2-time scoring champion, and of course still proving everyone wrong, still winning championships as recently as 2 seasons ago. A tier down from there, you still got people like DeMar DeRozan, a 6-time All-Star and 3-time All-NBA member, and one of the best mid-range artists of today's game. Drew Holiday, one of the best two-way guards of our generation with 5 All-Star defensive appearances. And finally, Jeff Teague. He's a 1-time All-Star, so he counts here also. But this class continues only to get deeper, with guys in this class like damn near Finals MVP Danny Green, a 3-time All-Defensive member in Patrick Beverley, and a myriad of other top role players this class created. I'm sure a lot of y'all expected this one, but this class is easy and undisputably an S-tier class with a mix of multiple MVP level players, All-Stars, and quality role players talented wrapped all into a great draft class. And if it weren't for a few circumstances for a few players in this class, it could potentially create a few more All-Stars from it. The 2000s decade from the draft perspective gave us a lot. MVP winners, Hall of Fame worthy talent galore, and of course the plethora of all-star level talent and late bloomers. But as we look through those 10 draft classes, we've always got to remember that not all draft classes are created equal, especially if you're 2000. Some have the ability to come together in a competitive and stacked class to make for an amazing bundle of talent, and some are just known for one guy and not much else. But of course, I hope you enjoyed and learned something today, as my vision for this channel is to inform and entertain. If you want more videos like the one I made today, be sure to check out my tier list video on the 2010s draft classes or the tier list playlist in general with similar content like this. And thank you again to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video, and be sure to use my link to get nice rewards to start off your raid journey. But anyways, this is your boy, Alvini Linguini, saying peace.